Hello and welcome. In this video, I want to talk about the brutes again. The reason why I wanted to add something is because I recently uploaded a video showing my brute builds. From these videos, I made a bold claim that you can in theory build a brute like that strong that you can put him in the enemy ranks and the brute will kill everybody. And I thought I should test it or even, well, test the limits of it. And that's why I did this kind of build. I will explain it in a minute. But the result was that I was able to kill over 50 guards with just 2 brutes, which is insane. You can watch the speed up clip in the link, well, in the description of this video. But I want to talk about the build and well, what leads me to think that this one is just good in general. But also, I want to show you the whole fight without the speed up, and I will talk about the Wartales meta in general, what my thoughts are on the balancing and so on. So, we will start with the build itself. I use 2 brutes in my video. So, the first one is just the classical Vanguard brute. I already explained how this one works in my other video, also linked in the description. We want the blacksmith, obviously. And the new creation is this guy, where I tried something different. The approach, the main idea was to gain as much damage reduction as possible, because if you send somebody into the enemy ranks, then he needs a lot of resilience and survivability. Thankfully, the brutes have access to heavy armor and some other quite nice damage reduction perks. So yeah, that's what we are going for. So for the specialization, I choose the destroyer. You could also choose the brawler because they both utilize the heavy armor. But I think that the thunderblow, well, I will not use it in the experiment, so I will choose the destroyer instead to increase the damage reduction even further by weakening the opponent. We go for the valorous duel because we have a lot of engagement in single target combat. We choose armor breaker because, well, it was actually a really like tough decision, because there are some other good perks here. For example, the cruelty, which gives you 20% damage reduction against targets with debuffs, and we can apply easily debuffs. This perk gives us protection, which is just 30% damage reduction when there are 2 enemies in a specific range. The thing is, even if you have like infinite damage reduction, well, not or nearly infinite damage reduction, if you can't kill the opponent, you will never fight. You will never win the fight. So we will need the 35% damage from the armor breaker, also the brutality and inspiration. We need the movement to, well, have some strategic options, and the damage buff of armor breaker is just too good to trade it for some cheap damage protection, well, damage prevention, damage reduction, whatever. On the level 8 trait, I choose one-on-one to give another 30% damage increase and damage reduction. This perk will always be active because, well, we're fighting alone, basically. I will not choose Guard Breaker here because the weapon I use ignores guards anyway. So we have basically the inbuilt Guard Breaker on the weapon already applied. We will use the second weapon, the weapon swap thingy. I slowly start to appreciate this perk because it allows you to basically equip 2 additional oils. And we see that this might be better. Well, it is better than the other options because we will never use this one because we're fighting alone, and also we never disengage because it costs too much valuable armor and resources to, well, take the 50/50. We just take the guaranteed attack of opportunities from Heater Shield and the enhanced visibility ham stamp. Yep. And for the class specialization, I choose the overwhelming presence because we want as much armor and damage reduction as possible, so we can keep this buff as long as possible. At some point of the fight, we will lose it, but we will use foods to stack damage anyways. So at some point of the game, we don't need a guaranteed crit, we just deal enough damage without the crit anyways. In theory, you could test like the exact math behind it and choose the temperance here for the guaranteed deflection and riposte, or even the opportunism or the cruelty. If you have enough damage, you can also use one of these defensive perks. But I only did one test run actually, and it went so well. Well, I wasn't expecting him to kill 50 guards, so well, that's the point. In my video, I used this one, but you can experiment by yourself. Okay, so for the whole setup, we go for the heavy armor, as I said, and we use all the armor increasing layers, the legendary one and the one that decrease critical hit. The decrease in critical hit isn't really important because we crit anyways with the overwhelming presence in the first couple of fights. Also, the defender's plates give us critical damage increase, which is nice. Yeah, for the helm stem, enhanced visibility for the guaranteed attack of opportunity, the heater shield for the guaranteed attack of opportunity. And for the belt accessory, I just choose the mustard tonic, which deals 5% of our maximum armor, which is a nice 45 damage against an enemy that engages us. And since our main strategy is to be engaged as often as possible, this is just a nice buff. But you can also choose other belt accessories, for example, canceling the movement penalty, or the other one that ignores guard if you don't want to use this hammer, if you want to use the legendary one-handed mace, for example. Yeah, there are some options you can play around with. This is just what I tried to, well, utilize. For the weapon swap, we have the two weapons. The second weapon is the Fugitive Hammer, which ignores guard and has sharpening and Alterous oil. So the idea is that we switch to that weapon in the end of our turn. So we will deal the retaliation damage with this weapon. So we ignore guard and have the 15% damage increase for attacks of opportunity and 10% for crits. And if in our turn we use the Purgatory, this is just because it's a one-handed mace that is also an AoE damage mace. So we can hit several targets, and if we do so, we regain health. And I use the strength and shielding oil because if we hit multiple enemies, the effect of the shielding and strength oil is triggered for each enemy we hit. So in theory, if we hit 2 enemies, the statistic says we get a guaranteed proc of this effect, which increases our strength by 10% and increases our damage reduction by 10%. And that's why this perk is basically damage reduction plus 10% and strength plus 10%, and therefore more useful than this or this. Nice to know is we have the maximum value of guard. So this one is just 80%. It caps at 80%. This 80% damage reduction is only as long as we have armor, and also if we are attacked from behind, or if we are already engaged and we get surrounded and attacked, this one is less effective. And also enemies can use effects that reduce your guard, so be prepared to that one. Don't count, well, too much on your guard. For some other effects, I use all the instruments here. So the crystal skull, the astral thingy, the musical thingy, and the solar system. The main reason is to give the brute some passive buffs, because we use foods to increase its damage. And if we look at the food, we have, yeah, the basic food that increase critical damage, constitution, strength, critical hit, everything we can use in the fight. You could also add some movement or willpower or whatever. And the more important one are the scaling foods. So food that will increase our damage over time. And the first one is that we gain rage, which is nice. It's just 50% damage increase caps, but well, 50% is nice damage increase. The next food increases our damage by 5% for each buff or debuff. The next one is that we perform attack of opportunities and gain preparedness. Preparedness is just additional 1% permanent damage increase for attack of opportunities. So whenever we are engaged, we trigger 2 attacks of opportunities from the enhanced visibility and the powerful counter. Those stack. So we get an additional 2% each time we get encountered. And the main idea is that we have to kill the enemy who is attacking us with these 2 shots, and that's why it's very important that we have enough damage to do so. If we aren't able to kill, or 1 shot, 2 shot, whatever you call it, the enemy, then, well, we get surrounded and die. Yeah. The next one would be that we gain Fit for Rage, which is just 5% critical damage increase for each crit we do. And this one is basically the Pirate's Lucky Charm helm stamp on the food, which is nice. It stacks up our critical damage um, and helps us like securing some really, really good kills because our critical hit is still above 50%. So if we hit 2 times with our attack of opportunity, it's statistically also guaranteed that we crit. And if if one crit hits, it well, it hits like a truck. It's really, 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 really strong. And you probably saw the result from my Reddit clip. But now I will roll the entire fight and I will talk a little bit about the meta itself. So the first question I want to answer is how it is possible to fight these many guards with just 2 companions in your group. So I did that by using the adaptive setting. So the enemy group size scales with my group size. And then I just hired a bunch of mercenaries, like 10 to 15. And I sent all of them to the tavern from the tavern DLC. And until your next rest, the enemy size, group size, are still scaling with your old group size. So the amount of enemies I fight here are actually scaled and like balanced around a group size of 10 to 15. And that's why I can fight these many guards. So I did this experiment to show the strength of the brute because I think the brute is just S tier. It's even stronger than the swordsman in my opinion because it has access to the guaranteed crit and also the guaranteed armor penetration. Some of the swordsman weapon also can ignore guard, and the swordsman itself can, well, reduce the enemy guard to 0 with the special ability. But when it comes to the attack of opportunity, I think the brute is superior because he has, well, more defensive options. And in this clip, you can see that stacking the damage is really necessary because currently we have a lot of armor and still more armor than the enemy, so we have a guaranteed crit whenever we attack. You see with the 400 damage here. But the armor will dwindle soon, and we need to compensate it. And currently we have 8 stacks of rage. It caps at 50%. We have 8% of attack of opportunity damage, 10% strength boost from the oils, and so on and so on. Also, the 30% brutality bonus is quite nice, which is permanent for the rest of the fight. So, I think that the brutes are the strongest, well, characters in the endgame. I have to specify every aspect of the metagame until the endgame because you don't have access to all of these fancy tools right up front, like when you start a new campaign. I think from a balance point perspective, it's not really necessary to change anything. Because if you start a new campaign, you don't have access to all these tools, and you have still the progression and the struggle to fight tough enemies. And if you progress to the end game, you already like beat all the tough opponents or all the tough challenges. And in my current campaign, I, well, completed the game to 100%, so there's nothing really to do. So I just stockpile resource and fight the guard. Basically, I farm every piece of armor, every piece of weapon, and trying like different builds when you have access to all of the items. I created my own kind of sandbox scenario here. And I did it because they release, well, DLCs, downloadable content, and I want to test the new content as soon as possible. So on the optimized route, I have to say. So I want my mercs trained for that scenario, and I don't really want to start a new campaign just because they released a new kind of weapon set or something. I just want to test the maximum possible because that's a really important breakpoint for me, or an interesting comparison. Because if you say, or if you look at this gameplay and you see, oh my god, this brute just kills 5 enemies in one turn, well, that's because of its maxed out equipment and setup. If you have your own brute and it's level 8 or 6 or whatever, and you don't have maxed out equipment, you still have also scaling enemies with your current position, but you will not have the same like over the top, because at some point the enemies stop, like, or the enemy ceiling of the potential threat there are, it ends at a certain point, but you can still increase your strength, if this makes any sense to you. So the whole progress of the campaign is more of an even balanced experience, I think. But at some point, the opponents stop scaling, or not scaling, but the opponents are stopping being a threat to you, because you are just faster improving your stats and your abilities, and also your, well, your strategic combat decisions and so on. To conclude, I don't think that balance-wise they have to change anything. It is also sad that they already changed the attack of opportunity damage down to 25%. So they nerfed it by 25%, which is huge. It's a quarter of the current version. And the attack of opportunity itself is also something the enemy utilizes with the heater shield or some perks. So in theory, it makes the early game easier, because in the early game the enemy has more of these attack of opportunity effects than you do. But in the end game you can use them, and it's basically a nerf from you at that point. But attack of opportunities are an interesting mechanic by itself. It allows you to make the fight a little bit more interesting for a turn-based combat system. And I think this ability itself is not problematic, and also the scaling with the damage is not problematic at all. I think the attack of opportunity is one of the skills that makes this game like fun at all, because it looks more realistic to be attacked and have these skirmish types of fight. If it's just one unit moves to another one and attacks, and then the other unit moves and attacks, it's, well, it's more static. But with the whole idea of attacks of opportunity, it becomes more of a strategic option. And still, there are a lot of opponents that use it. For example, the rangers from the guard have the enhanced visibility helm stamp. So you have to basically farm the rangers from the guard to get these helm stamps. And also the Inquisition, which have the heater shield, or the enemy footmen who have perks that retaliates damage whenever you crit them. So for me, attack of opportunity is just a really, really interesting mechanic, and it's a fun to use mechanic. But in this video, I show you that you can, at some point in the game, in the end game, you can abuse this mechanic by just ignoring all, not all, but like 90% of strategic decisions, and just put your brute inside the enemy army. And he will, well, kill basically everyone. And in this case, both of my brutes kill over 50 guards, which is just insane if you think about it. But I tested this also with just one brute. And the 200 brute theoretically can handle 50 guards by its own, because its high mobility allows him to just run away, and the charge ability and the Dagon's hammer allows him to kill massively stacked up enemies in just one turn. Just obliterate 5 or 6 guards and then one array again. But the single hand or one-handed brute has the problem that at some point its armor is just completely reduced to 0. And at that point well, you can't survive any longer. And the one-handed brute has the problem that if he engages with an opponent by default by himself or by attacked by an enemy, and he's not able to kill that enemy right away, he gets surrounded and killed really easily. So that's why you need the breakpoint to kill every encountered enemy like instantly. If you can't do that, you're screwed basically. And also the biggest enemy for the one-handed brutes are spearmen. Spearmen have sometimes the ability to reduce your guard to 0. When that happens, well, 80% of your tankiness is just gone. And also they have a ranged attack, which means they will never engage with you at all. So they don't die from retaliation, you have to kill them by yourself. And that's why I choose 2 brutes for this specific scenario. They complement each other very well. You have the one tanky 100 brute that just pulls all the enemies together and tanks them efficient. And then the 200 brute just is the support and damage glass cannon that just rushes in, kill a bunch of problematic enemies, and then disengages. Yeah, it's just so beautiful to watch these brutes smashing all the enemies. And these are just extreme heavy guards, so these are the toughest enemies you can find in the entire game. In theory, the only enemies that have like more HP or are more threatening are arena characters. But the arena is a specific like situation on its own because they are less. Arena bosses are just 1 or 2 sometimes. And the scenario is very limited, and you can just, well, kill them by preparing yourself to kill them. So if you theoretically would encounter a mercenary group containing all of the arena bosses, which would be hilarious, just if, if all the arena bosses, well, like the Legends of the Arena, it's basically the whole idea of the Legends, Arena of Legends. But if there were a roaming threat, like on a specific wanted level, for example 5 or 6, or if they implement another one, you'll be hunted down by by a special guard, not the regular guard that just chases you around the first threat level. But at the highest threat level, the arena champions will start chasing you down. That would be, I think, fun. Because in this current state of the game, being at the highest threat level isn't really a difference to the first threat level. Sure, the enemy guard is more aggressive, but with enough horses in your troop and if enough food that gives you speed boosts or, well, exhaustions, reduced exhaustion, then you really don't fear the guard. In the combat, you will kill them, and in the open world, you can just outrun them pretty easily. So you take the 25% in critical hit improvement when you are at the highest wanted level from the crime path all the time. Basically, you want the 25% flat critical hit bonus all the time. So I think to the game is very balanced in my opinion. There are just some characters that just excel in every aspect, like the brute. And if they want to make it a little bit harder, they could, instead of increasing like the number of enemies or yeah, the the armor sets or the weaponry they have, just make them a fun experience with like yeah, the arena bosses that hunt you down. I think that would be a quite interesting thing. If we compare the strength of different different mercenaries to each other, then we see that the spearman is just the weakest of them all. I really tried for so long to make him work, the spearman, but the spearman is completely a supporter unit. And in a game where you don't really have time, or where time is key, basically, it's a turn-based game. So you spend your turn, and if you spend your turn just to set up a supporter unit, it just feels like wasting your time. Why should I use a spearman, get him in position? It's a little bit the same with the bowman and the from the infantryman specialization, where you have the attack of opportunity in a cone, the guaranteed one. You set up a position, a defensive position. Why should you do that if you just can kill all the opponent at once? So why spending turn or time to develop a defense when just offense is the best defense? You don't really you can utilize a defensive position because you don't really have the movement for it or the required skills. So it's more like a brawl in the early game of a campaign where just your mercenaries and the enemies are crushing each other into the face, and it's basically a battle of HP and armor. So just like a battle of resources, basically. But in the end game, where you can kill everything, it's not really important to have defensive options at all, and that's why the spearman is just the weakest of them all. Because every other unit has kind of offensive perks or unique or interesting ways to build them. For example, the Purgilist is also an interesting class, which is just an insane good arena fighter. But the problem is, being an insane good arena fighter doesn't really help you in the game, because every other fighter that is good in general in the open world combat is also good in the arena. For example, the well, the swordsman or the brute. You can beat the entire game with just swordsmen and brutes. You don't need other classes. But for your roleplay aspect of the game, you can do whatever you want, of course. And that's, I think, the reason why the balancing should not change currently. Because if you look at the top end, the ceiling of the highest possible damage you can do, and you compare it with everything else, and you ask the question, why does the spearman, for example, exist when you can just play swordsman and brute and kill everything, then you basically miss the point of a roleplay. If you want to roleplay your companion and have some options, you obviously have also options, or the option to do a bad decision. And it's really important that a game has something that is bad, actually, just to create or recreate a specific challenge for yourself and be having freedom in your build and decisions. Not everything has to be overpowered or completely, well, borderline OP. Yeah, that's just my my thoughts on that one. So to conclude, I think it's fun to test out the limits of a game, and also to know which are valid and strong options if you struggle with certain enemies or opponents, and you have a way to check what you can do to make it easier or achievable for you. But I think the game should have, or well, at least have access to something that isn't that strong, or have options to play around with. It's, I think, the reason why Wartales is so fun in general, because the game doesn't really tell you anything, and you have to figure it out by yourself. It's like a puzzle. I like it very, very much. yeah, and that's it. There you have it. You see what the brutes can do. And I think I will not repeat this experiment for the swordsman because it takes a lot of time actually to set up and costs a lot of resource. And I want to keep my resource for the next upcoming patch for the crossbowman. And I think that's it. And see you in the next one. Bye.